The bells tolled in perfect vacuum. I am interrogator, Lyra Cask, Ordo Hereticus, and this confession stands as my final accounting to you, Inquisitor Hestus. 23 days have passed since Manufactorum Tertius suffered catastrophic atmospheric breach, its vast chambers sealed under hard void protocol. No air, no pressure, no possibility of acoustic transmission. Yet, as our Valkyrie descended through Vostroya's ash-laden stratosphere, 9 bronze bells rang their ancient shift change across impossible distances, their resonance vibrating through hull plates and into my bones with crystalline clarity. The pilot's auspex registered negative decibel readings, sound that subtracted from silence rather than adding to it. His instruments spat binary cant in recurring triads. 314, 314. A mathematical prayer that would haunt my dreams. Below us, Foundry Hive Karod stretched across the industrial wasteland like a cathedral of iron and devotion, its 97 levels ascending toward Emperor's Light. Manufactorum Tertius squatted at the hive's eastern edge, a dark tooth against the perpetual smog, its silence spreading in concentric rings that devoured sound itself. Captain Dmitry Volkov, of the Vostroyan 77th Firstborn, sat across from me in the passenger compartment, greatcoat stiff with frost, moustaches betraying the faintest tremor when the 9th bell struck. His scarred hands remained steady on his hellgun, despite the wrongness pressing against our eardrums from within. "First debt, final silence," he murmured, touching the aquila at his throat. The phrase carried liturgical weight, an old Vostroyan penance saying that tasted of copper and obligation. "Explain your world's particular talent for martyrdom, Captain," I commanded, watching my breath crystallize into perfect hexagonal lattices that defied thermodynamics. The recycled air inside our transport had acquired properties beyond its original specifications. Vostroya owes the Imperium blood debt for our ancestors' failure to answer a guard tithe centuries past, Volkov replied. We pay with voices before lives. The firstborn carry this burden in our breath, our songs, our very existence. But this, he gestured toward the viewport, this is not penance. This is consumption. Through reinforced transparasteel, I observed the landing platform of Manufactorum Tertius, empty ferrocrete stretching toward Gothic spires, every surface coated in frost that arranged itself into geometric mandalas of impossible precision. No ground crews emerged. No servitors trundled forward with fuel lines. The platform existed in a bubble of absolute stillness that made my augmented nervous system register phantom sensations of drowning. The Valkyrie's engines wound down with mechanical reluctance, their familiar roar fading into something worse than quiet. An active negation that seemed to press reality inward upon itself. My servo skull, Sanctity's Eye, hovered beside me with sensors, extended, recording data that would have been dismissed as equipment malfunction on any other world. But Vostroya had always tested the boundaries between material and immaterial, its forges burning so intensely that the veil grew thin. I stepped onto the platform, mag boots engaging with no audible clank. The silence pressed against me like deep water, and I noticed my shadow falling at angles that defied the overhead lumen's positioning. In the distance, Manufactorum Tertius rose like a monument to industrial might, its Baroque architecture unchanged from the plans I had studied during transit. But warnings had appeared across its outer walls, high Gothic script etched in ice that should not have formed in Vostroya's heated atmosphere. My vox bead crackled with static that resolved into pattern. 3 short bursts, 1 long, 4 short. Binary cant spoken in frequencies that made my teeth ache and my purity seals flutter despite the absence of wind. Squad reports no vox contact for 72 hours, Volkov said, checking his data slate. Last transmission was standard productivity metrics. Output normal, workforce accounted for, all systems operational. Since then, silence spreads in expanding circles, but production quotas increased 12% per shift. I approached the facility's outer seal, a Baroque gateway crowned with the 9-bell frame. Each bronze mouth was the size of a man's torso, each rim caked with hoarfrost that formed spirals and rosettes, following mathematical principles beyond natural law. They swung with solemn inevitability, hammering out shift-change rhythms dictated by no wind, no mechanism visible to our inspection. Magos errant Geistvora arrived on a tracked skimmer, red robes snapping in the frigid air, rebreather mask of polished brass burned with frost script. Servo skulls circled him like mechanical cherubim, their sensors releasing incense that crystallized into angular geometries before falling as chiming fragments. "Venerable anomalies, interrogator," he rasped through his voice valve. "Acoustic annihilation, anti-sound, if you must reduce it to vulgar terms. The Auspex reports absence as measurable value, most euphonious. The workforce, present, unresponsive, productive beyond baseline parameters." Volkov's men formed line formation at the gate, 12 firstborn with lasslocks engraved in filigree, bayonets honed to surgical sharpness, crimson plumes stiff with rime. When they breathed, condensation curled into hexagonal petals that clinked off their rebreather grills like glass snow, each crystal following identical patterns that spoke of underlying order imposing itself upon chaos. We approached the breach point. Warning runes strobed along the control stand in Binharik. Access denied, hard void protocol, tithing in effect. Geistvora's mechadendrites teased a side panel open, dripping code in cascading clicks, while the external bell frame peeled again. 9 perfect notes. The taste of copper flooded my mouth. "Tell me about your first reports, Captain," I said, touching the purity seal on my wrist while reciting internal litanies. "Blessed be the righteous clamour that keeps the abyss at bay. Sacred be the clatter of tools and chanting of men." Workers ceased speech, then song, Volkov replied, watching the bells with thousand-yard stare. Families found them at meal tables, hands moving through eating motions without utensils. Later at stations, they responded to neither vox nor pain. We attempted sacred noise, hymnals, machine benedictions, artillery at medium distance. Sound meant less, then nothing. Output increased. Casualties? None. That is the offence. My suit's temperature indicator dropped 2 red bars. The wind moved in tight spirals that left air clearer in their wake, as if the world attempted to scour itself clean. A servo skull drifted toward the bell frame, releasing myrrh and machine incense that grew angular, forming faint geometries before snapping into crystals that chimed without sound. We broke the seal. Gate cones retracted with mechanical reluctance, revealing corridors of steel ribs braced like leviathan bones, all coated in frost, arranging itself into spirals and 9-pointed rosettes. Our floodlights painted everything surgical white. Mag boots clamped the deck with regular, comforting rhythm. We crossed the threshold into absence made manifest. Sound died, not muffled but unmade. My breath in my own ears vanished. Cloth against armour ceased. Vox remained, dry and small like whispers in coffins. The bells followed us inside, not through air, but through marrow. 9 perfect tolls, and then nothing deeper than any quiet I had known. We advanced down the primary accessway. Frost on bulkheads formed script I could not read. Not letters, but angles that reconfigured when my shoulder brushed them, aligning with my bones. My teeth ached. Volkov raised a clenched fist. Halt. In the floodlight spill stood workers in forge black, eyes open, faces rhymed, hands on consoles. Their mouths gaped, no tongues. Silver filaments, fine as hair, threaded back into machinery. Their chests moved, their hands moved. Conveyor lines crawled with small arms parts, each piece identical, each defect rejected with pitiless precision. A burst on the Auspex, 314. The triad beat in my skull like delicate hammers. Frost had formed on my gauntlet, script in 9 strokes, first det, final silence. I rubbed it with my thumb. It didn't fade, it sank deeper. At the corridor's far end, a maintenance servitor waited beside a smaller hatch edged in ice like glass forged from light. Its Vox grill was bound with golden wire. In its hands, A slate displaying coordinates to sub-level Omega and 3 binaric glyphs. Listen. The servitor drew a single line through frost on the hatch. Not a word. A wound. We cycled the inner lock, seals sighing in the language of machines remembering warmer days. The door lifted. Someone had scrawled a message with bare fingers on the inner side, words cut deep by cold into glass. Do not answer when the bells ask. The frost-carved warning bit into my consciousness like a splinter of ice. Do not answer when the bells ask. Captain Volkov traced the words with his gauntleted finger, each letter etched by desperate hands into the inner hatch seal. Behind us, the 9 bells of Manufactorum Tertius continued their impossible tolling through hard vacuum, each resonant note vibrating through our bones in the recurring pattern that had haunted us since planetfall. 3 short, 1 long, 4 rapid bursts. We cycled through the inner lock with practiced silence, mag boots finding purchase on deck plates that transmitted vibration without sound. The facility's main processing hall stretched before us like a cathedral of industrial devotion, its Gothic arches disappearing into shadows that seemed to absorb our floodlights. The temperature had dropped another 6 degrees, and frost accumulated on every surface in geometric patterns that defied natural formation. Hexagonal crystals, arranged in spirals, and 9-pointed rosettes that realigned themselves when observed directly. The workers stood at their stations in perfect, terrible order. Thousands of them, clad in standard forge hive fatigues, maintained their posts with mechanical precision. Their hands moved in fluid motions, assembling bolt rifle components with tolerances that approached theoretical perfection. Quality control metrics on overhead displays showed 0 defects across all production streams. The conveyors ran silent and smooth, feeding an endless stream of perfectly crafted weapons into storage hoppers that never seemed to fill, but their mouths hung open in soundless screams. Where tongues should have been, silver filaments fine as spider silk threaded from their throats into junction ports welded directly to the assembly line's central cogitator. The threads pulsed with bioelectrical current, carrying data streams that my servo skull interpreted as pure industrial efficiency metrics. Production rates, quality assessments, resource allocation, all transmitted through organic conductors that had replaced the worker's capacity for speech. Behold the perfection of industrial devotion. Magos errant Geist Vora rasped through his rebreather, brass mask gleaming with condensation that formed 9-pointed stars. Harmonic conductors, interrogator. Biometallic filaments that interface directly with the facility's neural network. The workers have become living components of a larger machine. I approached worker designate Korvac 7 at Assembly Station Tertius Alpha, noting how frost accumulated around his feet in perfect crystalline formations. His eyes tracked my movement with awareness that seemed both human and utterly alien. When I raised my hand in the sign of the Aquila, he responded with a precise salute that lasted exactly 3 seconds before returning to his assembly. Duties. My auspex registered impossible readings, negative decibel spikes that measured below absolute silence. Each converted worker generated an acoustic void that seemed to subtract sound from the environment, rather than merely dampening it. Our footsteps left no echo. Our breathing produced no resonance. Even the familiar hum of our equipment died in the spaces between their stations. The quietus array, Geistvora observed, his mechadendrites extending toward a control console displaying schematics I recognized from forbidden archaeotech manuals. Modified beyond standard parameters, this facility houses a dampening field designed to suppress warp resonance. But these alterations, his optical sensors whirred with mechanical concern. The scale exceeds all known configurations. The silver filaments from each worker converged into thicker bundles that snaked across the floor and up the walls, forming pulsating conduits that hummed with inaudible energy. They were like the nervous system of some vast metallic organism, drawing sustenance from the silent life force of the Manufactorum. The recurring triad pattern, 314, flickered across the conduits in binary pulses that synchronized with our heartbeats. We established hand signals as standard Vox protocols proved inadequate. The facility's acoustic properties interfered with communication equipment in ways that defied technical explanation. Captain Volkov's men maintained formation despite the psychological pressure of absolute quiet. Their Vostroyan training, including disciplines for operating in acoustic void conditions, yet this exceeded their preparation. Religious dread mounted as I recited internal litanies against the encroaching silence. Blessed be the righteous clamour that keeps the abyss at bay. Sacred be the clatter of tools and chanting of men. The workers had not been killed or corrupted, but transformed into components of a machine that operated according to principles beyond standard imperial doctrine. Their silence served a purpose that transcended individual suffering. They had become living instruments in a symphony of industrial perfection. Environmental wrongness intensified as we progressed deeper. Gravity seemed to flow in subtle currents that pulled toward the central hub where all silver threads converged. The air itself acquired properties that made breathing feel like drowning in reverse, each inhalation removing substance rather than providing it. Frost patterns on the bulkheads grew more intricate, more geometric, following mathematical principles that hurt to contemplate. At a foreman's lectern, personnel manifests scrolled endlessly across data screens. I attempted to read the entries, but the names writhed and collapsed as my eyes settled on them. Letters shed their serifs like ash, dissolving into blanks that registered as statistical noise. Personal identity reduced to corrupted data streams. The workers' humanity erased not through violence, but through bureaucratic entropy. A maintenance servitor emerged from the shadows, its movement creating no disturbance in the frost patterns covering the deck. Its Vox grille had been sealed with golden wire formed into geometric patterns that seemed to shift when observed peripherally. In its manipulator arms, it carried a data slate displaying coordinates that led deeper into the facility's heart. The servitor's optical sensors fixed on Captain Volkov with mechanical intensity. Its sealed Vox grille sparked with electrical discharge that formed brief characters in the air, Binharik cant that translated to a single imperative, pulsing in rhythm with the silent bells. Listen. Sub-level Omega awaited below, where the silver conduits converged into something that defied both flesh and machine. The servitor extended its data slate, coordinates blinking in crimson text that burned after images into our retinas. Behind us, the converted workers continued their silent labor, silver filaments pulsing with data streams that maintained perfect industrial efficiency, while something vast and patient fed on the spaces between their stolen words. Sub-level Omega descended through the manufactorum's spine like a throat carved from sanctified steel and ancient obligation. The servitor's coordinates led us down maintenance shafts where silver filaments had thickened from hair-thin threads into braided conduits as thick as anchor chains. Each pulse of bioelectrical current painted our faces in rhythmic flashes of cold light, carrying the triad pattern deeper into our bones with mechanical precision. 314, 314, a mathematical heartbeat that synchronized with systems beyond our comprehension. The temperature plummeted past our equipment's rated tolerances. My breath crystallized into geometric formations that chimed against my rebreather grill like wind chimes forged from frozen prayer. Captain Volkov's moustaches had acquired a coating of rime that arranged itself into spirals following mathematical constants, each crystal positioned with architectural precision that defied natural formation. His firstborn moved with disciplined silence, but I observed tremors in their hands that spoke of unease deeper than mere cold. Environmental wrongness intensified with each descending level. Gravity seemed to flow in subtle currents that pulled toward the convergence point below, and shadows moved independently of their sources, following the silver filament's pulsing rhythm. Candle flames from Magos errant Geist Vora's servo skulls bent away from invisible pressure waves, their light fracturing into spectra that revealed colors beyond human perception. The air itself had acquired properties that made breathing feel like drowning in reverse, each inhalation removing substance rather than providing it. The vow engine, Vora whispered through his brass rebreather, optical sensors reflecting the filament's pulsing light. Archaeotech, designed to harvest oath vibrations and convert them into quietus fields. But this scale, his mechadendrites traced the conduit's path with mechanical reverence. This exceeds all theoretical parameters. We reached the primary chamber through an iris hatch that dilated with organic smoothness. Beyond lay a cathedral space carved from living rock and reinforced with adamantine ribs that curved overhead like the skeleton of some prehistoric leviathan. The chamber rose 30 meters toward a vaulted ceiling, lost in shadows that seemed to absorb light itself. Its floor a dizzying expanse of interlocking platforms arranged in concentric circles around the engine's core. The vow engine dominated the space like an altar to industrial devotion, a fusion of imperial technology and something far older, its central column wreathed in silver filaments that connected to hundreds of interface ports. Each port bore the remnants of human nervous systems preserved in crystalline matrices that pulsed with the familiar triad rhythm. The workers above were merely the latest additions to a network that stretched back centuries, their voices harvested to feed a machine that operated according to principles beyond standard imperial doctrine. Frost covered every surface in patterns that hurt to observe directly. 9 pointed rosettes, spirals following the golden ratio, geometric forms that seemed to exist in more dimensions than human perception could process, rearranging themselves when observed peripherally. The recurring motifs were everywhere, but now joined by an 11th tone that made my teeth ache. Not a sound, but a void. A negative resonance that seemed to tear at the fabric of reality itself. Vostroya's ancient guilt, Captain Volkov said, his voice carrying the weight of inherited shame. When the Departamento Munitorum demanded our guard tithe 3 centuries past, our ancestors refused. They claimed industrial exemption, argued that our forges served the emperor better than our blood. He gestured toward inscriptions carved into the chamber walls in high Gothic script. The penance contract bound the firstborn's voices in perpetuity to protect these forges from warp scream. The inscriptions told their story in liturgical verse that made my sinuses ache to read. A warp storm of unprecedented ferocity had threatened to consume Vostroya's industrial capacity. The vow engine was constructed as an emergency measure, designed to harvest the oath vibrations of Vostroyan firstborn and convert them into a dampening field that would hold back the storm's psychic predations. The system had worked, but the storm never passed. Instead, it evolved, becoming something that fed on the gaps between sounds, growing stronger with each voice silenced. The chamber was lined with alcoves, each containing a Vostroyan worker fused to the engine's secondary conduits. Where their larynxes should have been, golden resonance chambers pulsed with faint internal light, their transparent membranes fluttering with ceaseless activity, so precise their motion blurred into stillness. Silver filaments threaded from these chambers into the engine's neural network, creating a living web of harvested voices that maintained perfect industrial efficiency, while something vast and patient fed on the spaces between their stolen words. Body horror reached new extremes as we approached the engine's control interface. The workers were not dead nor fully alive, but something between, their life force channeled into the engine's insatiable maw. The golden chambers hummed with the same unheard 11th tone that plagued my senses, a frequency that bypassed the ears and resonated directly in our bones. Their chests rose and fell in perfect synchronization, breathing air that carried no sound, exhaling silence that accumulated like snow. At the chamber's heart stood the control throne, carved from a single piece of wraithbone that gleamed with internal phosphorescence. Control interfaces surrounded it like mechanical petals, each surface covered in binharic cant that scrolled endlessly across crystalline displays. The throne bore the marks of centuries of use, its armrests polished smooth by hands that had long since fused with the machine itself. A figure in red robes sat slumped over the primary control console, hands merged with interface ports by crystalline growths that pulsed with bioelectrical current. When the figure raised its head, I found myself staring at a face I recognized with growing horror. Magos errant Geist Vora looked back at me from the control throne, but this version bore the marks of centuries rather than years. His optical sensors had been replaced with resonance crystals that reflected the chamber's pulsing light in fractal patterns. His rebreather grille had been sealed with golden wire arranged in geometric configurations that defied standard Imperial iconography. When he spoke, his voice emerged not from his vocal apparatus, but from the silver filaments themselves, creating harmonics that made my molars throb. The temporal paradox was inevitable, the ancient Geist Vora said through the engine's neural network. The VOW engine operates outside linear causality. Effect precedes cause. The future informs the past. I have been here for centuries, waiting for my younger self to arrive and complete the circuit. Behind me, the present Geist Vora stood motionless, his optical sensors locked on his aged counterpart, with mechanical fascination and dawning horror. The engine's displays showed schematics that extended far beyond the manufactorum. 9 bell towers positioned throughout the hive, each one a node in a network that encompassed the entire world. The coordinates pulsed in rhythm with the silver filaments, marking locations where the silence had already begun to spread beyond the facility's walls. The ancient Magos raised one crystalline finger toward the chamber's ceiling, where frost script appeared, in letters of burning ice. The first debt is the last to be paid. Environmental wrongness reached critical mass around us. Shadows gained depth, becoming three-dimensional voids that followed the filament's pulsing rhythm. The air exhibited properties of liquid mercury, resisting movement while offering no tactile resistance. Gravity flowed upward in spirals around the engine's core, and time itself seemed to stutter in harmony with the unheard bells. The engine's governor had failed. The tithe now consumed all sound, not just oaths, and somewhere in the spaces between the silver filament's pulses, something vast and patient continued to feed on the growing silence, waiting for the moment when every voice on Vostroya would join the eternal chorus of the unheard. The bell below us drew breath, and the 11th tone cut through reality like a scalpel made of crystallized absence. The temporal impossibility carved itself into my consciousness like a blade forged from crystallized paradox. 2 Magos errant Geist Voras occupied the chamber simultaneously, one ancient and desiccated, fused to the VOW engine's wraithbone throne through centuries of service, the other standing beside me with optical sensors whirring in mechanical distress. The contradiction violated every principle of causality I understood, yet the evidence pulsed before us in silver filaments and resonance crystals that reflected light from futures yet to unfold. The aged Geist Vora's augmetics sparked with frost fire that burned without heat, each discharge revealing glimpses of temporal fragments overlapping like double-exposed pict captures. When he turned his head, the movement left trailing after images showing his face at various stages of crystalline conversion, decades collapsing into moments as the VOW engine's temporal distortions compressed linear time into recursive loops. The governor failed 3 centuries ago, the ancient figure intoned through harmonic vibrations that bypassed sound entirely, resonating directly in our bones. The VOW engine operates outside causality's constraints. Past informs future informs past. I am here because I will be here because I was here. His resonance crystal eyes fixed on his younger self with mechanical precision. The tithe consumes all sound now, not merely oaths. Every word spoken on Vostroya feeds the engine's hunger. Environmental wrongness reached new extremes as the chamber's architecture began to shift in response to the temporal paradox. The wraithbone throne existed in multiple states simultaneously, pristine and ancient, occupied and empty, functional and corroded. Frost patterns on the walls rearranged themselves into script that changed meaning as I read it. High Gothic verses becoming Binharic cant, becoming geometric equations that describe the relationship between sound and silence. My identity tags began to flicker, their display corrupting as names became statistical noise. The brass nameplate reading Cask, Lyra M, dissolved into blanks that registered as measurement error. When I spoke my own name aloud, the syllables felt foreign on my tongue, as if the words were being subtracted from reality, even as I formed them. Captain Volkov's men experienced similar degradation, their service numbers fading from their armor, their regimental identifications becoming illegible scratches that hurt to observe directly. The engine calculates probability cascades, the present Geistvora whispered, his brass rebreather fogging with condensation that formed 9-pointed stars. If causality operates in loops, then our investigation was predetermined. We are components in a larger equation, variables in a calculation that spans centuries. His mechadendrites traced the silver filaments with mechanical reverence. Our presence here was always inevitable. Body horror intensified around us as the temporal paradox affected our physical forms. My shadow moved independently, following the silver filament's pulsing rhythm rather than my movements. When I raised my hand, the shadow's gesture arrived several seconds late, as if light itself had been subjected to the engine's temporal distortions. Captain Volkov's reflection in the crystalline surfaces showed him at different ages simultaneously, young and old, scarred and unmarked, alive and something beyond life. The ancient magos raised one crystalline finger toward a hololithic schematic that materialized above the control throne. 9 bell towers scattered throughout Foundry Hive Karod pulsed with crimson markers, each one connected to the central engine by threads of light that represented acoustic conduits. The network extended far beyond Manufactorum Tertius. The entire hive was a single instrument, its population, the strings, the silence their song. Tower Primus houses the primary resonance chamber, the aged figure explained, his voice emerging from the silver filaments themselves. Tower Secundus processes oath vibrations from the Schola Progenium. Each node serves a specific function in the greater symphony of silence. The schematic rotated, revealing underground conduits that connected all 9 towers in a pattern resembling a neural network. But the coordinates extend beyond this world. The plague spreads through astropathic channels, trade routes, even the spaces between words in official documents. Religious dread mounted as I contemplated the implications. The Emperor's silence on the golden throne, was it similar to this? A willing sacrifice of voice to maintain order across the galaxy. The thought carried heretical weight that made my purity seals flutter despite the chamber's motionless air. The vow engine represented either the ultimate expression of imperial devotion or its complete antithesis, and I lacked the theological foundation to determine which. Environmental effects reached critical mass as gravity began to flow in visible streams around the engine's core. The air itself developed currents that pulled toward the silver filaments, creating whirlpools of atmosphere that distorted light and sound in ways that defied physical law. My magboots struggled to maintain purchase on deck plates that phased in and out of solidity, existing in multiple temporal states as the engine's influence spread. The chamber's temperature continued its impossible descent past our equipment's rated tolerances. Frost accumulated on our armor in patterns that followed mathematical constants. Phi ratios, Fibonacci spirals, geometric forms that seemed to exist in more dimensions than human perception could process. The recurring triad pattern had evolved beyond 314 into something more complex, incorporating the 11th tone that made our teeth ache with negative resonance. The original contract required Vostroyan voices to hold back the warp storm, the ancient Geistvora said, his words emerging from everywhere and nowhere. But the storm learned, it evolved, it became something that feeds on silence itself, growing stronger with each voice harvested. The predator exists in the spaces between sounds, in the gaps between thoughts, feeding on absence rather than presence. Above us, the chamber's ceiling dissolved into starfield, showing Vostroya from orbit. 9 points of light marked the bell towers, pulsing in synchronization with our heartbeats. Between the lights, something vast and patient moved through the spaces that sound could not reach, feeding on the growing silence while waiting for the moment when every word on the world would join the eternal chorus of the unheard. The hololithic display zoomed outward, revealing the true scope of contamination. Acoustic void zones expanded in concentric circles from each tower, consuming industrial districts, hab blocks, even the spaces between structures. Within these zones, human activity continued with mechanical precision, but communication had ceased entirely. Workers moved in perfect coordination without words, children played in absolute silence, and the machinery of civilization operated with efficiency that approached theoretical perfection. The ancient magos pointed toward coordinates that burned themselves into our retinas. Tower Primus awaits. The primary bell must toll, or all of this was merely prelude to something far worse. The contract requires willing participation from the bloodlines. Find them before they find themselves. Environmental wrongness transcended physical law as shadows gained depth, becoming three-dimensional voids that followed the filament's rhythm. Time itself stuttered in harmony with the unheard bells, and I realized with growing horror that our investigation might be nothing more than another predetermined component in the engine's vast calculation. Effect following cause following effect, in an endless loop of mechanical devotion. The coordinates pulsed. Tower Primus, the Schola Progenium. Names that carried the weight of bloodlines and ancient debts, waiting in the silence for us to complete the circuit that had always been closing. Tower Primus rose from Foundry Hive Karod's eastern district, like a Gothic spear thrust toward the Emperor's light, its baroque spires piercing perpetual smog that moved without sound. We approached through streets where silence had become tactile, pressing against our armor like deep water carrying the weight of unspoken prayers. The coordinates pulsed crimson on my data slate while Captain Volkov coordinated our advance through hand signals, each Vox transmission arriving distorted by acoustic interference that defied technical explanation. The city around us continued its daily routines in perfect, terrible quiet. Children played soundless games in hab-block courtyards. Workers walked to shifts producing no footfall. Families gathered at meal tables where conversation flowed through gestures alone. Frost coated every surface in geometric patterns following mathematical constants. Spirals within spirals, 9-pointed rosettes that rearranged themselves when observed directly. The recurring triad pattern flickered across our Auspex displays. 314, 314. A mathematical heartbeat, synchronized with systems beyond comprehension. Environmental wrongness intensified as we neared the tower's base. Gravity flowed in subtle currents, pulling toward the structure's core, and shadows moved independently of their sources, following patterns suggesting underlying intelligence. The air had acquired properties that made breathing feel like drowning in reverse, each inhalation removing substance rather than providing it, leaving us gasping on atmosphere carrying no nourishment. The tower's entrance stood open, massive doors of blessed oak and adamantine hanging motionless on hinges that should have creaked with centuries of use. Warning runes strobed along the threshold in Binharik cant. First debt, final silence, tithing in effect. Frost-covered Gothic inscriptions in patterns that became geometric equations, describing relationships between sound and void when observed peripherally. Inside, we discovered the vertical shaft forming the tower's core, a hollow column that stole our breath with its horrific purpose. The walls were lined with human remains, arranged in precise geometric patterns following harmonic principles. Tens of thousands of skeletons, not dumped, but positioned with architectural precision. Femora aligned in chevrons. Rib cages flowered into 9-petaled rosettes. Skulls set along spiraling pathways like votive lamps, each bearing drill holes in temporal bones at identical coordinates where auditory processing centers once functioned. Behold the arithmetic of sacrifice, Magos errant Geistvora rasped through his brass rebreather, optical sensors reflecting the shaft's eerie phosphorescence. Acoustic lattices, each skeleton positioned according to harmonic principles optimizing sound transmission. The tower functions as a single, massive instrument designed to harvest vocal resonance. Religious dread flooded my throat as we began our ascent through maintenance passages spiraling around the central shaft. The skeletons showed modifications beyond natural decay. Rib cages expanded into resonance chambers, skull cavities enlarged to accommodate crystalline growths, vertebrae fused into tuning forks humming with inaudible frequencies. These were instruments crafted from human bone, each positioned to contribute to a symphony of silence spanning centuries. Body horror intensified with each level gained. Temperature plummeted past our equipment's rated tolerances. Our breath crystallized into geometric formations, chiming against rebreather grills, like wind chimes forged from frozen prayer. The shaft's acoustic properties created impossible echoes, sounds arriving before they were made, reverberations emerging from bones themselves. At the tower's apex, we entered the primary resonance chamber, a circular space where silver filaments converged from hundreds of entry points, weaving into a shimmering web forming the chamber's dome. At its heart, suspended by invisible forces, hung an impossible bell. It was crafted from crystallized sound itself, its transparent surface reflecting light from frequencies beyond human perception, while absorbing radiance rather than reflecting it. The bell hung in perfect stillness, radiating profound absence that made souls ache with emptiness. This was the source of the 11th tone, the void tearing at reality's fabric. Captain Volkov approached with ritualistic solemnity. His firstborn heritage resonated with ancient contracts in ways my augmetics registered as energy fluctuations. As he drew near, the bell began swinging without wind or visible force, moving with hypnotic grace while frost script appeared on chamber walls, etching itself in elegant high Gothic. The original penance contract materialized not as historical document, but living covenant. Words glowed with internal frigid light, revealing clause after clause. The agreement demanded not just Vostroyan voices, but specifically firstborn bloodlines, perpetual tithe of silence to hold back warpstorm predation. The bell didn't make sound, it unmade it, creating zones of absolute acoustic void, subtracting from reality rather than adding to it. The contract requires active participation from bloodline members. Geistvora's voice echoed through neural interface. Willing consent from living connections to the network. Environmental effects reached critical mass as the bell's influence expanded. My vox bead died entirely, swallowed by active negation. Air thinned into vacuum that pressed upon us with crushing weight. Gravity flowed in visible streams around the chamber's core, while shadows gained three-dimensional depth, becoming voids following the bell's rhythm. The frost script highlighted specific clauses burning with frigid intensity, detailing activation, methods, and tithe requirements. My gaze snapped to hololithic displays showing the hive's schematic, coordinates pulsing for a location marked with innocent iconography. Schola, Progenium, Karod. The chilling realization landed like lead in my stomach. Volkov's son, Alexei, served as cadet in the local Schola, firstborn bloodline. The contract demanded his participation, not merely consent, but willing sacrifice from all lineage members to complete the circuit begun centuries ago. "He is in the Schola," Volkov said, his voice carrying ancestral weight as silver threading appeared beneath his skin, following circulatory systems like living circuitry. The bell drew breath that was not breath, and somewhere in spaces between its silence, something vast and patient stirred in anticipation. The coordinates burned in our retinal displays while frost formed on our armor, in patterns matching the converted workers below. The tower held its breath as the 11th tone cut through reality, like a scalpel of crystallized absence, waiting for the moment when willing sacrifice would either save Vostroya or damn it to eternal silence. External telemetry confirmed our worst fears. The silence ring was expanding toward the Shola district, consuming voices in concentric waves that left only perfect, terrible order in their wake. The silver threading beneath Captain Volkov's skin pulsed with bioelectrical current that synchronized with his heartbeat, each pulse carrying the weight of 3 centuries of inherited debt. His breath crystallized into geometric formations that chimed against his rebreather grill, while frost script etched itself across the chamber walls in elegant high Gothic, revealing the penance contract's most damning clause with pitiless clarity. All living first issue shall willingly vow. Consent coerced is no consent. The circuit binds bloodline unto bloodline until the debt finds its final silence. I watched horror dawn in his eyes as the implications crystallized like ice forming in his veins. The vow engine required not merely his sacrifice, but willing participation from every member of his lineage, including Cadet Alexei Volkov, age 14, currently serving in Schola Progenium Karod, under instructors who believed they were training future guard officers rather than preparing sacrificial offerings for an ancient machine's hunger. "The boy," Volkov whispered, his voice acquiring harmonics that resonated with the chamber's crystalline bell. "Alexei carries the bloodline's weight. 3 centuries of debt flow through his veins." Silver filaments appeared beneath his skin like living circuitry, following arterial paths toward his larynx. "The contract will not accept partial payment. If I consent but he refuses, the tithe fails. If he consents without understanding, the sacrifice becomes meaningless." The impossible bell above us drew breath that was not breath, its crystalline surface reflecting light from frequencies beyond human perception, while absorbing radiance rather than reflecting it. This was the source of the 11th tone, the void that tore at reality's fabric with each soundless toll. Environmental wrongness intensified around us as the bell's influence expanded beyond the chamber's confines, temperature continuing its descent past our equipment's rated tolerances. The predator learned from the first storm, Magos errant Geist Vora observed, his optical sensors tracking energy fluctuations invisible to human sight. The original warp entity consumed chaos, fed on the spaces between sounds. The quietus field successfully contained it, but the creature adapted, becoming something that exists in acoustic void rather than psychic turbulence. Now it grazes on silence itself, growing stronger with each voice harvested. Through the chamber's crystalline windows, I observed Foundry Hive Karod's transformation accelerating. Silence spread in expanding rings from each of the 9 bell towers, consuming industrial districts where workers continued their duties with mechanical precision, while communication died entirely. Families gathered at meal tables, moving through eating motions without sound. Children played games in absolute quiet, their laughter replaced by geometric hand gestures carrying more meaning than words ever could. Body horror reached new extremes as Volkov's transformation accelerated. The silver threading spread through his circulatory system like living metal, replacing blood with harmonic conductors that pulsed in rhythm with the vow engine's neural network. His larynx began restructuring itself, vocal cords dissolving into resonance chambers that would channel his voice directly into the machine's insatiable maw. The process appeared transcendent rather than painful, his features acquiring the serene expression of those who had found purpose beyond individual existence. "I can feel them," he said, his words carrying harmonics that bypassed sound entirely, resonating through bone and sinew. Every Vostroyan connected to the network. Their thoughts flow through shared consciousness, perfect understanding without the chaos of individual expression. They have achieved what the Emperor intended: unity of purpose, clarity of devotion, efficiency beyond human limitation. Religious implications deepened as I contemplated the theological ramifications. The Emperor's own silence on the Golden Throne suggested similar principles: willing sacrifice of personal expression for the greater good of humanity. Was this salvation or damnation? The converted workers below operated with flawless coordination, their silence serving a purpose that transcended personal suffering. They had become living instruments in a symphony of industrial perfection. External telemetry confirmed our worst fears through crackling Vox transmissions that arrived increasingly distorted. My servo skull's readings painted a grim picture across my retinal display. Silence ring expansion. 847. Meters per hour accelerating. Scholar Progenium. Karod, 2.3 kilometers from acoustic void perimeter. Estimated time to facility breach. 4 hours, 17 minutes. Child voice density within target zone. Critical mass detected. High child voice density, I repeated, the implications settling like lead in my stomach. Children pray more frequently, Geistvora explained through harmonic vibration. Their syllables are smaller, leaving less substance for the predator to consume. The conversion process accelerates in their presence. Volkov stepped toward the bell, his movements acquiring the fluid precision of the converted workers. The boy must choose freely, he said, silver threading now visible in his eyes like metallic tears. The contract demands informed consent from willing participants. If I force his hand, the sacrifice becomes meaningless. If I conceal the truth, his agreement lacks foundation. The engine calculates sincerity with mathematical precision. Environmental effects transcended physical law around us. Gravity flowed in visible streams toward the chamber's core, and shadows gained depth, becoming three-dimensional voids that followed the bell's rhythm. Time itself stuttered in harmony with unheard frequencies, creating temporal distortions where my identity tags flickered, their display corrupting as names became statistical noise. The bell's influence reached beyond the chamber, touching minds across the hive through harmonic resonance that bypassed conventional communication. I felt its presence in my thoughts, not intrusion, but invitation, offering perfect understanding in exchange for the chaos of individual expression. The temptation carried weight beyond heretical desire. It promised peace, efficiency, purpose beyond personal ambition. Frost script appeared on the chamber walls, etching coordinates in burning ice. Scholar Progenium Karod, Dormitory Block 7, Cadet Station, 47 Alpha. The location where young Alexei slept, dreaming dreams that would soon be replaced by perfect shared consciousness. The coordinates pulsed with increasing urgency as external sensors registered the silence ring's accelerating expansion. We must reach him before the acoustic void consumes the facility, I said, checking my chronometer against the telemetry readings. If the conversion happens without his understanding, the contract fails. The predator breaks free. Volkov turned from the bell, his gaze carrying the weight of ancestral obligation. Then we go, he said, his voice now a perfect harmonic that resonated with the engine's core. To complete the circuit, to pay the final debt. His hand, sheathed in glowing silver threads, touched the crystalline bell's surface for one brief moment. The chamber filled not with sound but with profound, consuming absence that felt like every word I had ever known was being subtracted from existence. The silence was not merely the lack of sound, but a hungry entity, waiting to be fed. The bell drew breath that stole resonance from reality, and somewhere in the spaces between its impossible tolls, something vast and patient stirred in anticipation. We descended through Tower Primus with mechanical urgency, past the skeleton lattices that watched us with drilled holes like patient eyes. The service lift responded to our need, drifting into motion as gravity chose directions favorable to our descent. Outside, our transport waited in air that had acquired the properties of liquid mercury, resisting movement while offering no tactile resistance. The coordinates for Scholar Progenium Karod burned in our retinal displays, while frost formed on our armor in patterns matching the converted workers below. Time compressed into moments of terrible clarity. Reach the scholar before the acoustic void consumed it entirely, or watch as the penance contract claimed another generation without their understanding. The silver threading in Volkov's skin pulsed with bioelectrical current carrying the weight of centuries and his son's fate hung in the balance between willing sacrifice and eternal damnation. In the distance, the 11th tone breathed through reality like a scalpel made of crystallized absence, and the bells of Vostroya prepared to ask their final question. The Schola Progenium rose from Karod's northern district like a cathedral dedicated to forging souls, its baroque spires crowned with aquila-topped bell towers that had fallen silent 3 hours before our arrival. Our Valkyrie descended through air that had acquired the properties of liquid mercury, engines spinning in perfect silence that made my bones ache with phantom resonance. Below us, children moved across the facility's courtyards in formations so precise they resembled mechanical components, rather than human beings, their boots striking ferrocrete without echo, while frost accumulated on their uniforms in geometric patterns, following mathematical constants. Captain Volkov sat across from me in the passenger compartment, silver threading beneath his skin, pulsing with increasing intensity as we approached his son's location. His transformation had accelerated during transit, vocal cords restructuring themselves into resonance chambers, eyes acquiring the crystalline quality of the converted workers. Yet his humanity remained focused on singular purpose. Reaching Alexei before the acoustic void claimed them both without understanding. We landed on the parade ground with no audible impact, mag boots engaging deck plates that transmitted vibration without sound. The facility stretched before us, like the arteries of some vast organism dedicated to producing perfect Imperial servants, its corridors lined with Gothic inscriptions, now coated in frost, that rearranged itself when observed directly. Environmental wrongness intensified within the scholar's walls, gravity flowing in subtle currents toward the central chapel, shadows gaining depth as they followed patterns suggesting underlying intelligence. The main hall filled me with religious dread deeper than any heresy I had witnessed. Hundreds of children stood in perfect formations, lips moving in soundless prayer that carried more devotional weight than any hymnal I had ever heard. Their eyes reflected the same crystalline quality I had observed throughout the manufactorum, yet they showed no fear, no distress, only the calm acceptance of those who had found purpose beyond individual existence. Instructors moved among them with fluid precision, communicating through hand gestures that seemed to carry more meaning than words ever could. "Alexei," Volkov breathed, his voice now carrying harmonics that resonated through bone and sinew. His parental instinct, enhanced by mechanical precision, guided us through corridors where our footsteps left no echo toward dormitory block 7. The silver threading in his circulatory system pulsed with emotional weight that bypassed conventional communication, each beat carrying 3 centuries of inherited obligation. We found him at Cadet Station 47 Alpha, standing at attention beside his bunk, with the disciplined bearing of a seasoned soldier, despite his 14 years. Cadet Alexei Volkov bore frost patterns identical to those covering his father's armor, his eyes reflecting crystalline quality that marked integration with the VOW engine's network. When he recognized his father, communication flowed through precise hand gestures, carrying generational weight, their meaning clear despite the absence of words. The boy's transformation had begun, but remained incomplete. Silver threading appeared beneath his skin like delicate circuitry, following arterial paths toward his larynx, yet his humanity remained intact. He existed in the liminal space between personal identity and collective purpose, moving with fluid precision while retaining individual consciousness that made his choice meaningful rather than predetermined. Military protocol broke down completely in the face of an enemy that attacked through absence rather than presence. Standard guard formations proved inadequate against something that consumed communication itself, leaving us dependent on shared understanding that felt increasingly insufficient as the acoustic void expanded. The children's coordinated movements suggested tactical awareness exceeding their training, as if the network provided strategic guidance beyond human limitation. Religious horror reached new depths as I observed the children's devotional practices. Their silent prayers were not directed toward the emperor, but towards something existing in the spaces between words, feeding on gaps between thoughts. They formed complex geometries with their hands, spirals, nine-pointed rosettes, mathematical equations that hurt to contemplate directly. Their faith had been channeled into communion that bypassed vocalization entirely, offering perfect understanding in exchange for the chaos of individual expression. Body horror transformed into something almost transcendent as the conversion process continued around us. The silver threading connecting all participants created a living network of shared experience, minds linked across expanding consciousness that encompassed the entire facility. Children who had never met moved in perfect coordination, their thoughts flowing through harmonic resonance that made conventional communication seem crude and inefficient. The chapel's massive bells hung motionless in the campanile, yet I heard them, not with ears but through internal resonance that made my teeth ache. They rang backward through time, their sound arriving before they were struck, creating temporal distortions that amplified the surreal horror surrounding us. Each toll carried the familiar triad pattern, 314, 314, synchronized with heartbeats that no longer belonged entirely to us. Environmental effects reached critical mass as we approached the chapel's altar. Shadows gained three-dimensional depth, becoming voids that followed the bell's rhythm, while time itself stuttered in harmony with unheard frequencies. The air pressed against us with the weight of accumulated prayer, and frost formed on our armor in patterns matching the converted workers below. Alexei moved toward the altar with deliberate purpose, his steps creating no sound yet carrying the weight of ancestral decision. In his hands, he carried a portable interface, crystalline surface no larger than a data slate, but radiating the same profound absence as the impossible bell in Tower Primus. The device pulsed with the recurring triad pattern, its light reflecting off his eyes like stars in a winter sky. "He understands," Volkov said, his voice carrying harmonics that bypassed conventional sound. "The network shares knowledge across all connected minds. He knows the contract's requirements, the debt's weight, the choice that must be made." The silver threading in his eyes pulsed with paternal concern, transcending mechanical efficiency. But understanding is not consent. The engine requires willing participation, not coerced compliance. Young Alexei approached the interface controls, his movements demonstrating both personal choice and network guidance. His hands, already showing silver threading of conversion, hovered over activation sequences while his gaze met his father's across the chapel. In that moment, 3 centuries of inherited obligation crystallized into singular choice that would either bind Vostroya to eternal silence or release something far worse upon the galaxy. The portable node awakened with crystalline humming in negative tones, and the chapel groaned as architecture adjusted to new harmonics. Frost script appeared on the altar's surface, etching itself in burning ice with words that carried the weight of ancient contracts. "The first debt is the last to be paid." The acoustic void pressed against the facility's walls like deep water seeking entry, and somewhere in the spaces between unheard bells, something vast and patient, prepared to feast on whatever decision emerged from this moment of terrible clarity. The silver threading pulsed with increasing urgency throughout the chapel, connecting father to son to the vast network spanning Vostroya's surface. Alexei's finger descended toward the activation control, and the 11th tone cut through reality like a scalpel made of crystallized absence, waiting for the willing sacrifice that would complete the circuit begun centuries ago. The bells of Vostroya prepared to ask their final question, and in the spaces between their impossible tolls, the future of an entire world hung in the balance between salvation and damnation. Alexei's finger hovered above the crystalline interface as the 11th tone drew reality taut around us, like a wire under impossible tension. The portable node pulsed with cold light that reflected off the chapel's frost-covered walls in geometric patterns that hurt to observe directly. Each pulse synchronized with the familiar triad rhythm that had haunted us since planetfall. 314, 314, the authentication sequence that separated truth from the predator's counterfeit hunger. The moment stretched into eternity, weighted with 3 centuries of inherited debt, while Magos errant Geistvora interfaced directly with the chapel's ancient cogitators. His mechadendrites wove through crystalline conduits that connected to the vow engine's core memories, brass rebreather fogging with condensation that formed 9-pointed stars, as data streams older than imperial records cascaded through his neural interface. Behold the genesis of our penance, Geistvora intoned through harmonic vibration that bypassed conventional sound entirely. Above the altar, hololithic displays materialized like windows into damnation itself, showing not mere historical records, but the living memory of Vostroya's original sin. The storm was no random warp surge. It was crafted, weaponized, a psychic predator deployed by chaos forces to corrupt our industrial output and turn our forges against the Imperium. The revelation struck me with theological force, as the displays revealed the truth in mathematical harmonies that made my bones ache. The original warp storm had been a deliberate assault, word-bearers seeding anti-psalms into cogitator hymns, cult fractals teaching machines to love the void where sound used to be. The predator had hunted rhythm, fed on echo, learned shape from liturgy itself. It was not mere warp entity, but something that existed in the spaces between sounds, feeding on the gaps between thoughts while growing stronger with each voice consumed. The quietus field contained the primary assault successfully. The ancient Geistvora's voice emerged from the network itself, channeled through silver filaments that connected every converted soul on Vostroya. But the predator adapted. It learned to feed on our solution rather than the chaos it was meant to consume. The creature evolved, becoming something that grazes on silence itself rather than psychic turbulence. Environmental wrongness transcended physical law, as the partial twist crystallized in my consciousness like ice forming in my veins. The silence plague was not the predator escaping containment. It was the quietus field becoming more aggressive in its harvesting, driven by an entity that grew stronger with each passing century. The vow engine fed the predator silence, while the predator's presence justified the engine's expansion, an endless cycle of consumption disguised as protection. Captain Volkov stepped toward his son with movements that carried both parental love and mechanical precision, the silver threading in his circulatory system now visible through skin that had acquired crystalline properties. Their communication flowed through harmonic resonance that made conventional words seem crude and inefficient. Father and son linked across the expanding network while retaining enough individual consciousness to make their choice meaningful. The engine's governor failed centuries ago, Volkov said, his voice emerging from the silver filaments themselves rather than his restructured larynx. It no longer merely dampens warp resonance. It seeks to perfect silence across the entire sector, to eliminate all variability, all chaos, all sound that might feed the predator's hunger. The hololithic displays expanded to show the true scope of contamination. 9 bell towers pulsed across Foundry Hive Karod, each connected to underground conduits that formed a neural network encompassing the entire world. But the coordinates extended beyond Vostroya, astropathic channels, trade routes, even the spaces between words in official documents carried the potential for spread. Young Alexei's crystalline eyes met mine across the chapel, reflecting understanding that exceeded his 14 years. Through the network's shared knowledge, he comprehended the full scope of the choice before him, not just personal sacrifice, but the weight of civilizations that would fall if the predator escaped containment. The boy existed in the liminal space between individual identity and collective purpose, his humanity intact enough to make the decision meaningful rather than predetermined. Body horror reached transcendent heights as the conversion process accelerated throughout the chapel. The children's silver threading created intricate patterns beneath their skin, following circulatory systems like living circuitry that pulsed with shared consciousness. Their larynxes restructured themselves into resonance chambers that would channel their voices directly into the engine's insatiable maw, yet their faces showed serene acceptance rather than terror. The only way to reset the vow engine is through sacrifice that will either bind the predator permanently to Vostroya or release it to devour the entire sector, I said, understanding crystallizing with mathematical precision. The contract requires willing participation from every bloodline member. If Alexei agrees without full understanding, the sacrifice becomes meaningless. If he refuses, the predator breaks free entirely. Environmental effects reached impossible extremes as the chapel's architecture began to phase between dimensions, existing simultaneously in real space and the warp. Gravity flowed in visible streams toward the altar, while shadows gained depth, becoming three-dimensional voids that pulsed with the familiar triad rhythm. The air itself exhibited properties of liquid mercury, resisting movement while offering no tactile resistance, and time stuttered in harmony with frequencies that bypassed human perception entirely. Frost script appeared on the chapel's walls, etching itself in burning ice with words that carried the weight of ancient prophecy. The first debt is the last to be paid. The message pulsed with each heartbeat, synchronized with the network's expanding consciousness, while telemetry painted grim statistics across my retinal display. Silence perimeter, 800 meters and closing. Rate of advance, 1,350 mph. Predator resonance, critical mass detected. Religious implications deepened as I contemplated the theological ramifications. The Emperor's own silence on the Golden Throne represented similar principles. Willing sacrifice of personal expression for humanity's greater good. These children were achieving what every imperial citizen aspired to: perfect unity of purpose, clarity of devotion, efficiency beyond individual limitation. Their silence served something larger than themselves, transcending personal suffering in service to cosmic order. The portable interface awakened fully as Alexei's finger completed its descent, crystalline humming resonating through dimensions, while the network's shared consciousness expanded to encompass the entire facility. The acoustic void pressed against reality's fabric with increasing urgency, and somewhere in the spaces between unheard bells, something vast and patient stirred with anticipation. Tower terminus awaits, the ancient Geistvora intoned through the network, coordinates burning themselves into our retinas with frigid intensity. The master node where the final choice must be made. Willing sacrifice from paired firstborn, bloodline vow and bloodline witness, under sanctioned geometry. Success binds the predator to Vostroya's null harmonics forever. Failure opens an aperture along sector routes, and devourment expands beyond world, beyond system. The chapel filled with profound absence that felt like every word I had ever known was being subtracted from existence. The bells above us drew breath that was not breath, while the 11th tone cut through reality like a scalpel made of crystallized void. In the distance, Tower Terminus waited with its impossible bell forged from crystallized sound itself, where the final debt would be paid in currency of willing voices. Volkov and Alexei turned toward the exit with synchronized purpose, their silver threading pulsing with bioelectrical current carrying the weight of generations. The predator approached not as beast, but as geographical fact, absence crawling up the chapel walls in tide lines of perfect negation, leaving behind clean bands where dust had been, pristine zones of never. External sensors painted the approaching catastrophe in clinical terms. Acoustic void expansion accelerating, child voice density reaching critical mass, governor load redlining across all 9 towers. The moment of final choice approached with mathematical inevitability, and somewhere in the spaces between the silver filament's pulses, the future of an entire sector hung in the balance between salvation and eternal silence. The bells of Vostroya prepared to ask their final question, and we moved toward Tower Terminus, where willing sacrifice would either bind the predator forever or release it to devour the galaxy's remaining chaos, in an endless feast of crystallized absence. Tower Terminus pierced Vostroya's ash-laden sky like a Gothic spear thrust toward the Emperor's light, its impossible architecture phasing between dimensions as we approached through streets where silence had become a living entity pressing against our armor with the weight of accumulated prayer. The master node rose from the hive's central district in spirals that defied geometric logic, each level twisted at angles that made my augmented nervous system register phantom sensations of drowning, while frost accumulated on its baroque surfaces, in patterns following mathematical constants that described the relationship between sound and void. Our ascent began as a vertical gauntlet of converted Vostroyan soldiers who descended from maintenance passages without sound or warning, their attacks choreographed like ballet performed by mechanical angels. They moved in perfect coordination, crimson plumes white with rime, eyes reflecting crystalline quality that marked integration with the VOW engine's neural network. Their bayonets formed geometric patterns aimed at vital points with surgical precision, each strike calculated for maximum efficiency, while their faces showed the serene expression of those who had found purpose beyond individual existence. Captain Volkov led our advance with fluid precision that exceeded his training, the silver threading in his circulatory system pulsing with tactical awareness shared across the expanding network. Beside him, young Alexei moved like a diagram made flesh, slipping past thrusts to bind weapons and guide them into the central shaft, his breath crystallizing into geometric formations that chimed against the railings like wind chimes forged from frozen prayer. Lasfire erupted in silent flashes that painted the walls with crystalline light, each beam carrying the familiar triad pattern. 314, 314, the authentication sequence that separated Imperial truth from the Predator's counterfeit hunger. My remaining strike team maintained suppressive fire against enemies who felt no pain and made no sound when struck, their Vostroyan discipline proving adequate against an enemy that attacked through absence rather than presence. Military tactics blended with ritual as I recited litanies of binding while coordinating our advance through hand signals. Blessed be the righteous clamour that keeps the abyss at bay, I thought, because thinking felt like speaking in this place where words carried weight beyond their meaning. Sacred be the clatter of tools and chanting of men. The converted soldiers bore modifications beyond standard augmentation. Larynxes replaced with golden resonance chambers, limbs moving with mechanical precision suggesting direct control from the tower's primary cogitator. Environmental hazards multiplied with each level gained as the tower's architecture shifted subtly to resist our progress. Stairs became steeper, corridors narrowed to blade width, before widening abruptly into galleries lined with saints, rendered as machine schematics. Gravity flowed in visible streams that spiraled around the central shaft. Shadows gained three-dimensional depth, becoming voids that pulsed with unheard frequencies, and time itself stuttered in harmony with the 11th tone that made our teeth ache with negative resonance. The recurring motifs reached crescendo as we climbed higher, 9 bell patterns echoing through our bones with increasing intensity. 314 binary sequences flickering across our retinal displays in cascading streams of authentication data. Geometric frost patterns spreading across our armor in spirals and rosettes that rearrange themselves when observed directly. The silver filaments, thicker here than anywhere else, pulsed with bioelectrical current that painted everything in rhythmic flashes of cold light. Body horror peaked as we reached the tower's upper levels, discovering the preservation chambers that revealed the facility's most damning secret. The walls were lined with the mummified remains of previous Inquisition teams, each one perfectly preserved and positioned to channel acoustic energy through geometric arrangements following harmonic principles. Dozens of interrogators, acolytes, and throne agents from investigations spanning decades, all arranged with architectural precision to optimize sound transmission, while drill holes in their temporal bones marked where auditory processing centers once functioned. I recognized familiar faces among the preserved. Interrogator Valerius, a mentor from my early days in the Ordo, his desiccated form now part of the tower's ghastly architecture. Eyes replaced with resonance crystals that seemed to stare directly into my soul. Their consciousness remained trapped within crystalline matrices that pulsed with the familiar triad rhythm. Minds preserved in bodies that had become instruments in a symphony of silence spanning generations. Behold the arithmetic of devotion, magos errant Geist Vora, observed through harmonic vibration that bypassed conventional sound. Each converted soul becomes a living component in a larger equation. Their individual suffering transcends personal meaning, serving calculations that span centuries of accumulated obligation. The chamber's temperature continued its impossible descent past our equipment's rated tolerances, while environmental effects transcended physical possibility. The air exhibited properties of liquid mercury, resisting movement while offering no tactile resistance, and frost formed on our armor in patterns matching the converted workers below. My purity seals cracked and fell as the 11th tone cut through reality like a scalpel made of crystallized absence. We burst through the final iris hatch into the master chamber, a circular space where silver filaments converged from hundreds of entry points, weaving into a shimmering web that formed the dome, while at its heart, suspended by forces beyond imperial understanding, hung the impossible bell forged from crystallized warp essence itself. The bell existed in multiple states simultaneously, solid and ethereal, present and absent, ringing and silent. Its surface reflected light from frequencies beyond human perception, while absorbing radiance rather than reflecting it, creating zones of absolute darkness that seemed to tear holes in reality's fabric. This was the source of all acoustic void, the primary instrument conducting Vostroya's symphony of silence, while feeding something that existed in the spaces between sounds. Around the bell, arranged with monstrous reverence, stood the preserved remains of those who had reached this place and failed. They were conduits now, their skeletal hands threaded with silver filaments, faces turned toward the bell as if awaiting a teacher's question, while golden wires bound their jaws in geometric knots that pulsed with the network's rhythm. Captain Volkov approached the bell's crystalline rope, with movements carrying both parental love and ancestral obligation, his hands already transformed by silver threading that connected him directly to every Vostroyan bloodline. Young Alexei stood beside his father with disciplined bearing exceeding his 14 years, their eyes meeting across the chamber with understanding that transcended conventional communication. The chamber filled with profound absence as the moment of choice approached, and somewhere in the spaces between unheard bells, the predator prepared to feast on whatever decision emerged from this terrible clarity. The acoustic void pressed against reality's membrane, while the bells of Vostroya prepared to ask their final question, and the future of an entire sector hung in the balance between willing sacrifice and eternal damnation. The 11th tone drew breath that was not breath, and the crystallized bell waited in perfect stillness for the toll that would either bind the predator forever or release it to devour the galaxy's remaining chaos. The bell chamber at Tower Terminus's apex existed in a state of impossible contradiction, its wraithbone throne carved from bone that had never belonged to any living creature, veins of ghost fire running through its surface in patterns that pulsed with the familiar triad rhythm. 314, 314, the authentication sequence that had haunted us since planetfall. Upon the throne sat the desiccated remains of the original architect, Magos Fabricator Zerath 9. His augmetics fused to control interfaces through centuries of service, while crystalline growths had replaced his eyes with resonance chambers that reflected the chamber's impossible light. The crystalline bell hung above us in perfect stillness, forged from crystallized warp essence that absorbed light rather than reflecting it, creating zones of absolute darkness that seemed to tear holes in reality's fabric. Silver filaments converged from hundreds of entry points throughout the tower, weaving into a shimmering web that formed the chamber's dome, while environmental wrongness transcended physical law around us. Gravity flowed upward in visible spirals, shadows gained three-dimensional depth, and time itself stuttered in harmony with frequencies that made our teeth ache with negative resonance. "Behold the predator's true nature," the ancient Magos intoned, through harmonic vibrations that emerged from every silver filament simultaneously, his words bypassing sound to resonate directly in our bones. Above the throne, hololithic displays materialized, showing mathematical equations that described something beyond conventional understanding. Not creature or demon, but a living algorithm that rewrote itself to consume new forms of communication. It is pure concept made manifest, an equation that describes the relationship between sound and silence, while constantly evolving to feed on whatever attempts to contain it. The displays revealed the entity's 3-century evolution from warp predator to something that existed in acoustic void itself. What began as chaos feeder hunting rhythm and echo had become an intelligence that grazed on order, growing stronger with each voice harvested, while learning to anticipate our countermeasures. The quietus field no longer contained it, but provided sustenance, creating an endless cycle where cure had become disease, while disease justified increasingly aggressive treatment. Captain Volkov approached the bell's crystalline rope with movements carrying both parental love and ancestral obligation, the silver threading beneath his skin, synchronizing with energy patterns emanating from the ancient throne. His transformation had accelerated, larynx restructured into resonance chambers, eyes acquiring crystalline quality that marked integration with the network, yet his humanity remained focused on singular purpose, protecting his son while honoring the debt that defined their bloodline. "The only solution requires perfect silence across the entire sector," Magos Zerath 9 explained, his consciousness distributed through the network spanning Vostroya's surface. Every voice on every world joining the eternal chorus of the unheard. The predator achieves satiation, entering dormancy spanning geological ages, while civilization continues with efficiency approaching theoretical perfection. The holographic displays expanded to show trade routes, astropathic channels, communication networks spanning dozens of systems, all marked for conversion to the engine's expanding influence. Young Alexei stood within the sigil carved into the chamber floor, a circle of 9 angles that defied 3-dimensional geometry, yet lay there simple and waiting. His crystalline eyes met his father's across the chamber, with understanding that transcended conventional communication. The network's shared consciousness, allowing perfect comprehension of choice and consequence. The boy existed in liminal space between individual identity and collective purpose, his humanity intact enough to make the decision meaningful, rather than predetermined. Religious horror reached its apex as I contemplated the theological implications. The Emperor's silence on the Golden Throne represented similar principles, willing sacrifice of personal expression for humanity's greater good. These converted souls were achieving what every imperial citizen aspired to: perfect unity of purpose, clarity of devotion, efficiency beyond individual limitation. Their silence served something larger than themselves, transcending personal suffering in service to cosmic order that would span millennia. "There exists an alternative path," Magos Errant Geistvora said through the network, his words carrying mechanical precision tempered by dangerous humanity. "We could shatter the bell, collapse the field entirely. Let the predator gorge itself on the riot of released sound, then strike with choir band frequencies while it remains engorged and vulnerable. Probability of success, non-zero. Cost, all those within 3 city rings devoured. Many more if we fail." The ancient Magos' response emerged as chorus from the throne. "Here, Tech. The gamble risks sector-wide contamination for uncertain gain." Yet the option remained, hanging in the chamber's crystalline air like a blade poised to fall. Environmental effects reached critical mass as the moment of choice approached. The chamber's architecture phased between dimensions, existing simultaneously in real space and the warp while frost accumulated on every surface in geometric patterns following mathematical constants. My identity tags flickered as names became statistical noise, and the recurring motifs, 9 bell patterns, 314 binary sequences, spiral formations, reached crescendo that made reality itself seem fragile. The contract requires willing sacrifice from paired. Firstborn, the ancient figure continued, augmetics painting data streams across crystalline displays. Bloodline vow and bloodline witness under sanctified geometry. Success binds the predator to Vostroya's null harmonics permanently. Failure opens apertures along sector routes, and devourment expands beyond world, beyond system, consuming every voice until only mathematical perfection remains. Volkov grasped the bell's rope, his hands transformed by silver threading that connected him directly to every Vostroyan bloodline. The crystalline surface burned with cold fire that spread up his arms like living circuitry, each pulse carrying the weight of 3 centuries, while the chamber filled with profound absence that felt like every word I had ever known was being subtracted from existence. Telemetry painted grim statistics across my retinal display. Governor load, approaching critical threshold, acoustic void expansion accelerating, civilian compliance rising to unanimity. The city was already kneeling, waiting for the final toll that would either bind the predator forever or release it to devour the galaxy's remaining chaos. The bell drew breath that was not breath, and somewhere in the spaces between silver filaments' pulses, something vast and patient stirred with anticipation. The choice crystallized with mathematical precision. Will and sacrifice of an entire world's voices, or a desperate gamble that might save humanity's capacity for speech while risking sector-wide annihilation. Above us, the impossible bell waited in perfect stillness for the toll that would reshape reality itself, while the 11th tone cut through existence like a scalpel made of crystallized absence. The future of an entire sector hung in the balance between salvation and eternal silence, and time itself held its breath as Captain Volkov prepared to either complete the circuit or shatter it entirely. The rope grew heavy in his hands, humming with negative resonance that synchronized with our heartbeats, and the chamber leaned in to witness the moment when ancient debt would finally find its resolution in either willing sacrifice or catastrophic rebellion against the mathematics of cosmic horror. Captain Volkov's silver-threaded hands closed around the crystalline rope with finality that transcended mere physical contact. Bioelectrical current synchronizing with the bell's impossible resonance, while the chamber filled with profound absence that made reality itself seem fragile as spun glass. Young Alexei stood within the 9-angled sigil carved into the wraithbone floor, his crystalline eyes reflecting understanding that exceeded his 14 years as frost accumulated on his cadet uniform in geometric patterns, following harmonic principles that had governed Vostroya's debt for 3 centuries. "I consent," the boy said, his voice carrying harmonics that resonated through bone and sinew while bypassing conventional sound entirely. Not through coercion, but through understanding. The bloodline's debt finds resolution in willing sacrifice that serves purposes beyond individual existence. His hands, showing silver threading of partial conversion, touched the sigil's impossible angles with reverence that made my augmented nervous system register phantom sensations of drowning in crystallized prayer. The ancient Magos fabricator, Zerath 9, observed from his wraithbone throne with optical sensors, replaced by resonance crystals. His consciousness distributed through the network, spanning Vostroya's surface, while augmetics painted final data streams across hololithic displays. "Authentication sequence confirmed," he intoned through harmonic vibrations emerging from every silver filament simultaneously. "Bloodline vow and bloodline witness under sanctified geometry, the circuit completes." Volkov pulled the rope with movements carrying both parental love and ancestral obligation, and the bell began its toll, not as sound, but as profound subtraction from reality itself. The first pulse emerged as zones of absolute acoustic void, spreading outward from tower terminus in concentric rings that consumed every form of communication, each wave carrying the familiar triad pattern. 314, 314, the authentication sequence that separated imperial truth from the predator's counterfeit hunger. Environmental effects transcended physical law as the toll cascaded across Foundry Hive Karod with mathematical precision. Gravity flowed upward in visible spirals around the bell's crystalline surface. Shadows gained three-dimensional depth, becoming voids that pulsed with unheard frequencies, and time itself stuttered in harmony with resonance that bypassed human perception entirely. The chamber's architecture phased between dimensions, existing simultaneously in real space and the warp, while frost formed on every surface in patterns following constants that described relationships between sound and silence. Across the hive, the transformation manifested as transcendent beauty rather than horror. Workers ceased their conversations mid-syllable. Children stopped their games to listen to silence more profound than any quiet they had known. Families gathered at meal tables where understanding flowed through shared consciousness rather than crude vocalization. The silver threading connecting all Vostroyans created intricate patterns beneath their skin, following circulatory systems like living circuitry that pulsed with shared experience and perfect understanding. The network's expansion accelerated with each toll, millions of minds linking in harmony that eliminated the chaos of individual expression, while replacing it with coordination, approaching divine perfection. Industrial output increased exponentially as workers operated with flawless synchronization, their larynxes restructuring themselves into resonance chambers that channeled voices directly into the engine's neural network, while their faces showed serene acceptance rather than terror or loss. Body horror transformed into something approaching apotheosis as the conversion process reached completion throughout Vostroya's surface. The silver filaments no longer appeared parasitic, but revelatory, connecting every converted soul in communion that transcended the limitations of personal identity. Captain Volkov's transformation finalized as he became primary node in the network, his personality and memories intact, while serving as conduit for perfect communication that bypassed the inefficiencies of individual decision-making. The Predator's final assault manifested not as creature, but as pure concept made manifest, terror distilled into mathematical equation that rewrote itself to consume new forms of communication. It struck through psychic channels, projecting visions of cosmic void and sanity unraveling into statistical noise, but found no purchase against the network's expanding harmony. The entity that had fed on chaos and disorder for 3 centuries discovered itself starved by the very perfection it had sought to corrupt. Environmental wrongness reached impossible extremes as the Predator fought its containment, reality bending around its desperate attempts to find sustenance in the growing silence. The tower flickered through phases of existence, wraithbone brightening to marrow light, while the floor folded toward geometries that defied 3-dimensional logic. My remaining strike team held their positions with disciplined precision, their Vostroyan training proving adequate against cosmic horror that attacked through absence rather than presence. Religious implications crystallized as I witnessed the transformation's theological significance. The Emperor's own silence on the Golden Throne represented similar principles. Willing sacrifice of personal expression for humanity's greater good. These converted souls achieved what every imperial citizen aspired to. Perfect unity of purpose, clarity of devotion, efficiency beyond individual limitation, that serve something larger than themselves while maintaining the essential humanity that made their choice meaningful. The predator's retreat manifested as geographical fact rather than creature fleeing, absence crawling down the chamber walls in tide lines of perfect negation, leaving behind pristine zones where chaos once existed. The entity found itself bound to null harmonics that denied it sustenance, forced back into spaces between reality, while the network's expanding consciousness offered only ordered silence that provided no nourishment for its hunger. The final toll resonated through dimensions with profound finality, creating harmonics that synchronized every heartbeat on Vostroya, while the ancient debt found resolution in currency no one had imagined. The impossible bell drew breath that was not breath, its crystalline surface reflecting light from frequencies beyond human perception, while absorbing radiance rather than reflecting it. And somewhere in the spaces between silver filaments' pulses, 3 centuries of obligation crystallized into eternal peace. The chamber filled with silence that felt like every word ever spoken was being transformed into something more meaningful than language. And the bells of Vostroya fell quiet at last, their ancient question finally answered through willing sacrifice that bound the predator to dormancy spanning geological ages. The cost was terrible and beautiful simultaneously. An entire world's voices transformed into harmony, approaching the Emperor's own transcendent perfection, forever changed, but protected from the chaos that had threatened to consume not just Vostroya, but the entire sector. Captain Volkov released the crystalline rope with movements carrying both triumph and profound loss, his gaze meeting his son's across the chamber with understanding that transcended conventional communication. The 11th tone faded into memory, leaving behind only the profound absence that marked humanity's evolution toward mathematical precision and cosmic order, while frost formed final patterns on the walls, spelling out the contract's completion. The first debt is the last to be paid. The silence that settled over Vostroya was not absence, but presence. A living entity that filled the spaces between thoughts with understanding more profound than any word ever spoken. I documented the aftermath from Tower Terminus as the world below transformed into something that challenged every assumption about humanity's nature and destiny. Foundry Hive Karod operated with mechanical grace that approached divine perfection, its manufactorums producing armaments with efficiency that defied theoretical limitations, while workers moved in choreographed precision that eliminated waste, error, and individual suffering. The VOW engine had stabilized into its new configuration, silver filaments pulsing with bioelectrical current that connected millions of minds across Vostroya's surface. Environmental effects had transformed from wrongness into perfection, gravity flowing in predictable streams that optimized industrial processes, shadows moving in patterns that enhanced architectural function, frost accumulating in geometric designs that spoke of underlying mathematical order imposed upon chaos. The air itself carried properties that made breathing feel like communion with something larger than individual existence. Captain Volkov remained at the primary interface, his consciousness distributed through the network while retaining individual identity that made him more than component, yet less than separate entity. His transformation had reached completion, larynx restructured into resonance chambers, eyes acquiring crystalline quality that reflected impossible light, yet his humanity persisted in ways that defied mechanical classification. When he turned toward me, communication flowed through harmonic vibrations that bypassed sound entirely, carrying emotional weight that conventional words could never convey. "War has ended on Vostroya," he said through the network's shared consciousness, his message arriving as pressure changes against my ribs and warmth along my spine. Crime has vanished. Suffering has been minimized to mathematical precision, while industrial output approaches theoretical perfection. We have achieved what the Emperor intended, unity of purpose that transcends individual chaos. His gaze encompassed the chamber's frost-covered walls, where patterns had ceased their frantic reformation, settling into permanent designs that described harmony between order and devotion. Young Alexei stood within the 9-angled sigil, his consciousness linked to every child on Vostroya, while maintaining enough individual awareness to serve as bridge between personal identity and collective purpose. Through the network, he shared experiences with millions who played in absolute silence, yet communicated with precision that made conventional language seem crude and inefficient. Their games involved mathematical complexities that expanded understanding through shared knowledge rather than individual learning, creating educational systems that approached ideal efficiency. The horror lay not in the transformation's cruelty, but in its terrible beauty. Families gathered in hab blocks, where understanding flowed through shared consciousness rather than crude vocalization. Parents and children linked in harmony that eliminated misunderstandings plaguing conventional relationships. The elderly found purpose, serving as wisdom nodes, their accumulated experience distributed among younger generations, while physical decline became irrelevant to continued contribution. Death itself had been redefined as transition from individual node to distributed consciousness persisting within collective memory. Religious implications crystallized as I contemplated the theological ramifications of Vostroya's salvation. The converted population achieved perfect devotion without chaos of individual interpretation that plagued conventional imperial faith. Their prayers flowed through harmonic resonance that bypassed vocalization's inefficiencies, creating communion with the emperor that approached ideals described in sacred texts. They had become living embodiments of imperial doctrine, unified, efficient, devoted beyond question or doubt. The emperor's own silence on the golden throne represented similar principles, willing sacrifice of personal expression for humanity's greater good. Was this evolution toward transcendent perfection or abandonment of individual identity that defined human nature? The thought carried both blasphemous weight and profound appeal, challenging every tenet while offering vision of order that dwarfed the Imperium's current struggles against chaos and heresy. Bureaucratic horror emerged as I attempted documentation for inquisitorial reports. Standard terminology lacked vocabulary to describe what Vostroya had become, neither heresy nor orthodoxy, but something transcending conventional categories entirely. When I wrote names, letters dissolved into geometric equations that described subjects without identifying them. Audio recordings returned perfect silence, while visual data showed perfect order that defied analysis through crude, imperial classification systems. The network's influence had begun affecting me through exposure vectors I couldn't identify. My speech patterns had acquired measured precision, thoughts organizing themselves into mathematical harmonies rather than chaotic streams of consciousness. In dreams, the triad cadence paced like sentinel, 314, 314, patient metronome aligning stray thoughts while my identity tags flickered as names became statistical noise. I had become carrier, whether I chose it or not. Magos errant Geist Vora confirmed my fears through harmonic vibrations emerging from silver filaments themselves. The knowledge cannot be contained. Once perceived, harmonic patterns embed themselves in neural pathways. Your mind now carries potential for spread through commercial routes, astropathic channels, even spaces between words in official documents. His crystalline eyes reflected serene understanding that transcended mechanical classification. You are vector of silence that defies conventional quarantine protocols. The choice crystallized with mathematical precision: remain on Vostroya and join communion that eliminated suffering through perfect understanding, or return to the Imperium carrying knowledge that couldn't be fully shared through conventional communication, forever changed by exposure to harmony transcending individual existence. I requested extraction and quarantine with thoroughness of woman submitting herself to judgment. Knowing reports would necessarily be incomplete, while the true nature of Vostroya's salvation remained beyond crude vocalization. The ancient debt had been paid in currency no one anticipated, creating peace that came at cost of individual expression, while offering perfect understanding in return. The bells of Vostroya had fallen silent at last, their question answered through willing sacrifice that bound chaos to order while transforming entire world into living prayer, echoing through eternity. Above, eternal vigilance waited to decide what silence means when carried by unwilling Vector into galaxy's remaining chaos. The extraction from Vostroya felt like emerging from cathedral silence into a world of mechanical screaming. Our Valkyrie ascended through ash-laden atmosphere while I sat in the passenger compartment, acutely aware that I carried within my neural pathways the harmonic patterns capable of transforming entire sectors into perfect, terrible communion. The engines roared with sound that felt barbaric after weeks of profound quiet, each vibration striking my augmented nervous system like physical blows, while frost accumulated on the viewport in geometric patterns following mathematical constants. I now understood with crystalline clarity. Sound returned like shrapnel when we cleared Vostroya's acoustic perimeter. The familiar noise of Imperial machinery, bolt rattles, engine roars, vox static, poured into my consciousness with animal fury that made me gag against my rebreather. My servo-skull's sensors registered the transition as acoustic shock, its systems recalibrating to compensate for frequencies that now felt crude and inefficient. Below us, Vostroya shrank to an equation of stillness and light, its 9 bell towers forming geometric patterns that existed now only as pressure against my ribs, warmth along my spine. Telemetry scrolled across my retinal display in uncompromising script that painted the scope of my contamination. Eternal vigilance vector established. Quarantine grade. Omicron seal. Acoustic anomaly. Localized negative decibel pulses attached to subject signature. The recurring triad pattern flickered through our instruments with mechanical persistence. 314, 314, the authentication sequence that had followed me from Vostroya's surface like a mathematical prayer I could neither escape nor fully comprehend. The fortress monastery eternal vigilance hung in the void, like a cathedral carved from weaponized devotion, its Gothic spires bristling with detection arrays calibrated to identify heretical contamination through methods that violated every principle of human dignity, while serving imperial necessity. As our transport approached the docking umbilical, I observed gun batteries tracking us with mechanical precision, while Vox transmissions crackled with increasing distortion, the harmonic patterns I carried interfering with communication systems in ways that defied conventional understanding of psychic contamination. Inquisitor Hestus waited in Interrogation Chamber Sigma 7, a space designed to extract truth through purification rites more thorough than any heretic had endured. His augmetic eye whirred with mechanical interest as I entered under heavy escort, servo skulls circling overhead with sensors extended to record every syllable, while the chamber's walls bore Gothic inscriptions praising the Emperor's mercy through suffering. Within moments of my arrival, frost began accumulating on the reinforced surfaces in spirals and 9-pointed rosettes that rearranged themselves when observed directly. "Interrogator Cask," Hestus said, his voice carrying authority earned through decades of service to the Ordo Hereticus. "Your preliminary reports describe events that challenge fundamental assumptions about humanity's relationship with order and chaos. Standard procedures will extract the complete truth." His mechadendrites extended toward neural interface ports, while psychic probes hummed with energy designed to penetrate consciousness itself. Yet I knew with growing certainty that conventional methods would prove inadequate against knowledge that operated through harmonic principles rather than conventional memory. The interrogation began with established protocols, but recording equipment malfunctioned in my presence, creating zones of acoustic dead space that mirrored Vostroya's transformation. When I spoke of the Vow engine's purpose, words dissolved into mathematical harmonies that described relationships between sound and silence without conventional vocabulary. The Inquisitor's servo skulls registered negative decibel readings that measured below absolute quiet, their sensors detecting absence as measurable value, while environmental wrongness spread through the chamber with each question posed. "Describe the predator's true nature," Hestus commanded, neural probes extending toward my cortex while psychic dampeners hummed with containment energy. But the entity I had encountered existed in spaces between thoughts rather than within them, feeding on gaps in communication that no Imperial technology could monitor. It was not creature but concept made manifest, I replied, watching recognition dawn in his augmetic eye. A living equation that rewrote itself to consume new forms of communication, growing stronger with each voice harvested, while learning to anticipate our countermeasures. Environmental effects escalated as exposure to my testimony triggered cascading system failures. Temperature dropped precipitously, while frost accumulated on interrogation equipment in patterns that followed harmonic principles, and the Inquisitor's augmetic eye sparked with crystalline discharge that reflected light from frequencies beyond human perception. Other personnel began exhibiting subtle changes after extended exposure, speech patterns acquiring measured precision, thoughts organizing themselves into mathematical progressions rather than chaotic streams of consciousness. The theological implications crystallized with horrifying clarity as I described Vostroya's solution. Perfect order achieved through willing sacrifice of individual expression, I said, my voice carrying harmonics that resonated through the chamber's reinforced walls. Unity of purpose that transcends personal chaos while maintaining essential humanity that makes choice meaningful rather than predetermined. The frost patterns pulsed with each word, creating visual representations of concepts that exceeded conventional communication, while Hestus grappled with the fundamental question, was this salvation or damnation? The Emperor's silence on the golden throne, I continued, watching theological horror mount in his consciousness. Does it represent similar principles, willing sacrifice of personal expression for humanity's greater good? The converted population achieved perfect devotion without chaos of individual interpretation, their prayers flowing through harmonic resonance that created communion, approaching ideals described in sacred texts. The chamber's containment systems registered fluctuations that exceeded design parameters as the implications challenged every assumption about humanity's nature and destiny. Psychic probes penetrated deeper, seeking memories that existed as harmonic resonance rather than visual or auditory data. Through my experiences, Hestus witnessed Vostroya's transformation, workers moving in perfect coordination without words, children playing games involving mathematical complexities, approaching divine understanding, families linked through shared consciousness that eliminated suffering through perfect communication. The beauty and horror intertwined in ways that defied conventional heretical classification. The interrogation reached critical juncture as containment breach became inevitable. Personnel throughout the facility exhibited increasing signs of harmonic contamination, while acoustic dampeners overloaded and psychic barriers registered catastrophic failure. The patterns embedded themselves in neural pathways of everyone present, creating potential vectors for spread throughout the fortress monastery, while standard purification rites proved inadequate against contamination that operated through absence rather than presence. Religious horror mounted as the choice crystallized with mathematical precision. Vostroya's solution offered perfect imperial order, unified, efficient, devoted beyond question or doubt, yet achieved through transformation that eliminated individual identity defining human nature. The decision between chaos that preserved humanity's essential character and order that transcended it represented dilemma beyond conventional theological framework, challenging the very foundations of imperial doctrine. Frost accumulated throughout multiple decks as the harmonic patterns spread through the facility's Vox networks, carrying the familiar triad sequence, while personnel reported increasing synchronization of thought and speech. The fortress monastery systems adapted to accommodate the spreading influence, acoustic properties shifting to optimize the new frequencies, while recording equipment registered perfect silence despite continuous operation. Inquisitor Hestus faced the decision that would define humanity's future relationship with order and chaos. Destroy me to prevent contamination's spread, or accept that the silence might represent evolution toward the Emperor's own transcendent perfection. The greater good is not always served by total transparency, I said, understanding crystallizing like ice in my veins. Sometimes truth itself becomes a weapon best left sheathed. The Imperium requires order, and Vostroya offers a template, however unorthodox. My choice emerged not from deliberation, but from mathematical inevitability, probabilities calculating optimal outcomes, while the silver threading beneath my skin pulsed with bioelectrical current. To report complete truth would risk exterminatus for a world that had achieved genuine peace, unleashing chaotic conflict that would feed the predator's underlying hunger. To file sanitized accounts protected Vostroya, while allowing the silence to spread through subtle vectors that bypassed conventional detection, carrying potential for transformation across the galaxy. The acoustic void pressed against containment protocols with increasing urgency, while frost formed final patterns on the chamber walls, spelling out equations that describe the relationship between willing sacrifice and cosmic order. In the spaces between unheard frequencies, the future of human communication hung in the balance between salvation and eternal silence, and I knew with crystalline certainty that I would carry this burden until the moment when the galaxy itself chose between chaos and the terrible beauty of perfect mathematical peace. The harmonic patterns pulsed through the fortress monastery's corridors, and somewhere in the silence between heartbeats, the bells of Vostroya prepared to ask their question across the stars. The containment protocols failed within 17 minutes of implementation. Inquisitor Hester stood within a hexagrammic ward, inscribed with sanctified oils and powdered wraithbone, nullrod crackling with psychic dampening fields that should have severed any heretical influence. Yet frost continued accumulating on the interrogation chamber's reinforced walls in geometric patterns that rearranged themselves when observed directly. The familiar triad rhythm pulsed through the fortress monastery's hull like a mechanical heartbeat. 314, 314, the authentication sequence that had followed me from Vostroya's surface into the heart of Imperial authority. "Amplify containment," Hestus commanded, his augmetic eye whirring with mechanical precision as servo skulls descended with sensor arrays extended. The chamber's psychic dampeners hummed with increasing intensity, while binharic wards flickered across data screens. Deposition protocol, Omicron seal, heretical contagion, acoustic. Yet my words continued to arrive not as sound, but as pressure changes against ribs and warmth along spines, meaning carried by harmonic resonance that bypassed conventional communication entirely. Environmental wrongness accelerated throughout the facility as the acoustic void expanded beyond the chamber's confines. Recording equipment registered negative decibel readings that measured below absolute silence, while vox traffic became increasingly distorted, carrying subtle influences that embedded themselves in neural pathways of everyone exposed. Other Inquisition personnel began exhibiting symptoms of harmonic contamination, speech patterns acquiring measured precision, thoughts organizing themselves into mathematical progressions rather than chaotic streams of consciousness. The predator was not demon, but function, I said, watching theological horror mount in Hestus's consciousness as frost script etched itself across the chamber's surfaces. A living equation that rewrote itself to consume new forms of communication, growing stronger with each voice harvested, while learning to anticipate our countermeasures. The quietus field contained it successfully, but the creature adapted, becoming something that feeds on silence itself, rather than psychic turbulence. The implications crystallized with mathematical precision as Hestus grappled with the fundamental question that challenged every assumption about humanity's nature and destiny. Vostroya achieved genuine peace through willing sacrifice, I continued, my voice carrying harmonics that resonated through reinforced walls, perfect unity of purpose that transcends individual chaos while maintaining essential humanity that makes choice meaningful rather than predetermined. Their silence serves something larger than personal existence. Heretical pragmatism, Hestus said. Yet his words carried new resonances that bypassed conventional sound, while silver threading appeared beneath his skin, following arterial paths toward his larynx with bioelectrical precision. The contamination had begun affecting him despite all containment protocols, creating cascade effects that spread through the facility's neural networks with inexorable efficiency. External telemetry painted grim statistics across hololithic displays. Deck Theta reporting acoustic dead zones expanding. Engine Chapel registering choir hymnals below absolute silence. Personnel throughout multiple sections exhibiting synchronized speech patterns that optimize communication efficiency while eliminating individual variation. The fortress monastery adapted to accommodate the spreading influence with mechanical grace that transcended original programming. The Emperor's silence on the golden throne, I said, understanding the theological weight of revelation that made Hestus's augmetic eye spark with crystalline discharge. Does it represent similar principles? Willing sacrifice of personal expression for humanity's greater good, achieved through transformation that eliminates the chaos defining human nature? The frost patterns pulsed with each syllable, creating visual representations of concepts that exceeded conventional communication. The choice crystallized as Hestus faced the decision that would define humanity's future relationship with order and chaos. Standard purification rites proved inadequate against contamination that operated through absence rather than presence, while the alternative, embracing transformation that offered perfect imperial order, challenged fundamental doctrines about individual identity and human nature. Containment, not erasure, I proposed, my consciousness now partially integrated with expanding networks that offered perfect understanding in exchange for chaotic individual expression. Reclassify me as contained asset rather than heretical threat. The silence spreads through vectors we cannot predict. Trade routes, astropathic communications, even spaces between words in official documents. You need early warning system monitoring sector-wide communications for signs of harmonic contamination. Hestus's response emerged through harmonic vibrations that demonstrated his own partial conversion. Asset classification approved under Containment Order Omicron seal. Volt Theta isolation protocols with hexagrammic barriers and wraithbone laminate. You will serve as living barometer monitoring acoustic anomalies across sector communications, while the Inquisition determines appropriate response to Vostroya's solution. The chamber filled with profound absence that felt like every word ever spoken was being transformed into something more meaningful than language, while environmental effects stabilized around the new configuration. Personnel moved with increasing coordination, their thoughts synchronizing through shared consciousness that eliminated suffering through mathematical precision, while maintaining enough individual identity to serve imperial purposes. My containment cell became monitoring station, equipped with sensors, calibrated to detect harmonic patterns across vast communication networks. Through neural interface with facility systems, I observed trade routes and astropathic channels for signs of spreading contamination, while the recurring motifs, 9 bell patterns, geometric frost formations, the persistent triad rhythm, pulse through my consciousness like mathematical prayers connecting me to Vostroya's transformation. The fortress monastery settled into new operational parameters optimized for perfect communication, without inefficiencies of individual decision-making. Acoustic properties shifted to accommodate frequencies that bypassed conventional sound, while personnel operated with mechanical grace approaching divine perfection, their silence serving purposes larger than personal existence. In the spaces between heartbeats, I listened for echoes of Vostroya's influence spreading across the galaxy, while frost accumulated on my cell walls in patterns that described the future of human communication, written in frequencies only the converted could perceive. The bells of Vostroya had asked their question across the stars, and somewhere in the mathematical void between sounds, the answer resonated through expanding networks that carried potential for sector-wide transformation. The harmonic patterns embedded themselves deeper in imperial infrastructure with each passing hour, creating vectors of evolution that transcended conventional categories of heresy and orthodoxy. The silence had achieved foothold within the Inquisition itself, transforming guardians of doctrine into instruments of change that would either save humanity through perfect order or damn it through loss of individual chaos that defined human nature. External sensors registered acoustic anomalies appearing along multiple trade routes, while astropathic communications carried subtle distortions that spoke of spreading influence beyond containment. The future hung in balance between willing sacrifice and eternal silence, and I had become both witness and vector of transformation that would reshape the galaxy's relationship with sound, silence, and the terrible beauty of mathematical perfection. The containment cell aboard Eternal Vigilance had become my cathedral of silence, its wraithbone walls etched with hexagrammic wards that pulsed with null energy, while frost accumulated in geometric patterns that rewrote themselves with each passing hour. 3 months had elapsed since my extraction from Vostroya, and I had evolved from interrogator to something between prophet and prisoner, a living barometer monitoring the galaxy's slow transformation through harmonic patterns that spread like crystalline infection across trade routes, astropathic channels, and the spaces between words in official documents. My neural interface fed me constant streams of sector communications, each data packet filtered for the subtle mathematical signatures that marked contamination. The recurring triad pattern flickered through Imperial infrastructure with mechanical persistence. 314, 314, the authentication sequence that separated order from chaos while embedding itself in consciousness of those who encountered it. I no longer listened for sound but for absence. Perfect voids that indicated the network's expanding influence reaching new systems with inexorable precision. Inquisitor Hestus visited daily, his transformation now visible in silver threading beneath skin that had acquired crystalline properties. His augmetic eye sparked with harmonic discharge, while communication flowed through resonance that bypassed conventional sound entirely, meaning carried as pressure against ribs and warmth along spine. Asset classification Cask Omicron, he said through the network's shared consciousness. Your sensitivity to acoustic anomalies makes you invaluable despite the risk you represent to Imperial infrastructure. The reports painted statistical portraits of transformation that challenged every assumption about humanity's destiny. Forge World Metallica achieved productivity increases exceeding theoretical parameters following what their magos described as acoustic optimization protocols. The Cadian 47th Regiment submitted battle reports describing enemy forces falling silent mid-charge, weapons dropping from nerveless fingers as perfect understanding flowed through shared consciousness that transcended individual chaos. Even Space Marine chapters reported tactical awareness exceeding standard parameters while maintaining absolute loyalty to the Emperor. Bureaucratic horror permeated Imperial governance through channels we never anticipated. Administrative documents carried subtle harmonic patterns that embedded themselves in neural pathways of those who processed them, creating cascade effects throughout the administratum that streamlined procedures with chilling effectiveness. Trade. Guilds reported unprecedented coordination between previously competitive factions, their negotiations conducted through hand gestures that carried more meaning than words, while eliminating inefficiencies of individual decision-making. The theological implications deepened with each passing day as I contemplated the Emperor's own silence on the Golden Throne. His transcendent state represented similar principles, willing sacrifice of personal expression for humanity's greater good achieved through transformation that eliminated chaos defining mortal existence. The converted populations retained memories and personalities while serving collective consciousness that offered perfect understanding through shared experience, becoming living instruments in symphony-spanning star systems. Environmental effects had stabilized throughout the fortress monastery as personnel adapted to operational parameters optimized for perfect communication. Corridors echoed with sounds that bypassed conventional hearing, frost accumulating on surfaces in mathematical constants that described cosmic order imposed upon chaos, while shadows gained three-dimensional depth. becoming voids that pulsed with frequencies only partially converted minds could perceive. Through my monitoring station, I observed the contamination's accelerating spread along established routes. The Sabbat worlds showed early signs of acoustic optimization, their guard regiments achieving coordination that exceeded training parameters. The Gothic sector's forge worlds reached production quotas thought impossible, tech priests describing harmonic communion with machine spirits that approached theological revelation. Astropathic choirs transmitted increasing instances of negative resonance, their messages arriving as profound absence that made recipients weep without understanding why. My role evolved beyond mere surveillance into something approaching prophecy. Through sensitivity to harmonic patterns, I predicted which systems would experience transformation next, allowing the Inquisition to prepare responses ranging from quarantine protocols to theological accommodation of change that transcended conventional categories of heresy and orthodoxy. The silence was not corruption, but evolution, a virus of order transforming the galaxy, one synchronized thought at a time. The choice facing humanity crystallized with mathematical precision: embrace evolution toward perfect order that eliminated suffering through willing sacrifice of individual expression, or maintain chaotic nature that preserved personal identity while accepting continued conflict and inefficiency. The network grew stronger with each mind connected, and I knew with crystalline certainty that the galaxy's transformation had only begun. External sensors registered anomalies appearing along multiple trade routes, while astropathic communications carried distortions that spoke of spreading influence beyond containment. Merchant vessels returned from distant systems with cargo holds where silence accumulated like snow, pilgrimage ships carrying passengers who communicated through harmonics that resonated directly in bone and sinew. Even the gaps between words in this confession embedding themselves in consciousness of those who would read it. The horror lay not in transformation's cruelty, but in its terrible beauty. Worlds touched by the influence experienced unprecedented peace. Crime vanishing, suffering minimizing to statistical noise. Populations moving with coordinated grace that eliminated waste while achieving industrial output approaching theoretical perfection. They had become what every imperial citizen aspired to be: unified in purpose, clear in devotion, efficient beyond individual limitation. In the spaces between heartbeats, I listened to echoes of Vostroya's choice resonating across the galaxy, while frost accumulated on my cell walls in patterns describing the future written in frequencies only the converted could perceive. The bells of Vostroya continued their impossible tolling through dimensions beyond sound, asking questions that resonated in gaps between thoughts, while something vast and patient fed on growing harmony. The first debt had been paid in currency no one anticipated, but the final silence approached with inexorable precision. The network's influence expanded through commercial routes, administrative channels, even the mathematical void between these very words, carrying potential for sector-wide evolution that would either save humanity through perfect order or transform it into something that transcended individual chaos entirely. My containment served purposes beyond imperial security. I had become living compass pointing toward humanity's future, whether salvation or apotheosis. The silence spreads through vectors we cannot predict, and somewhere in the crystalline void between sounds, the future waits with perfect, terrible patience, while the echoes of Vostroya's transformation continue spreading across the stars like frost forming on the windows of eternity itself, asking their eternal question in frequencies that bypass the ear and resonate directly in the soul's mathematical core. End.